Right now, inside the cells of millions of South Indian Brahmins, a cold case from 4,000 years ago is screaming to be solved. Their DNA tells a story so contradictory it sounds like a mistake. The mothers were here for 60,000 years, daughters of the land itself. But the fathers? According to the Y chromosome, they were strangers from the frozen steppes of Eurasia. This is not a myth. This is a biological paradox that rewrites the entire history of the subcontinent. And the first clue doesn't come from a history book. It comes from a fossil, a legend, and a whispered memory of giants. You are about to see how an ancient invasion, a social pyramid of startling power, and a secret hidden in your own bloodline are all connected in a mystery that will change how you see your own ancestry forever. Long before anyone carved a temple into the living rock of the Deccan, before Sanskrit was ever spoken south of the Vindhya Mountains, there was a memory. It was a memory of enormous beings, of demigods and demons, of races that walked the earth when the world was younger. The Puranas speak of them. The epics are filled with them. The Mahabharata describes Bhima, a man of terrifying strength and size, and his enemies, the Rakshasas, who were said to tower over ordinary men. In the Ramayana, the Vanara and the Rakshasa are not just different tribes. They are described as different orders of being, as if the poets were reaching for a language to describe categories of humanity that were fundamentally physically distinct. For generations, modern historians dismissed all of this. They called it mythopoeic fantasy, metaphor, religious allegory. The giants were archetypes. The stories were fables about the struggle between good and evil, or, more cynically, between a settled agricultural society and the untamed forest. The idea that these legends might encode anything real, a biological memory, a genetic truth, was considered absurd. It was a fantasy for a late-night television program, not a matter for peer-reviewed science. But then the bones began to emerge. In 2003, on the island of Flores in Indonesia, archaeologists uncovered the remains of a small hominid that the world would come to know as Homo floresiensis, the Hobbit. It was a shock. Here was a distinct species of human, surviving until perhaps 50,000 years ago, living alongside our own ancestors. The discovery forced a radical revision of the human story. We were not alone. We had shared the planet with other human species far more recently than anyone had imagined. Then, in 2010, came the discovery of the Denisovans, a new hominid group identified not from a complete fossil, but from a single finger bone in a Siberian cave. The DNA extracted from that bone revealed a vast ghost lineage, a population that had spread across Asia and interbred with modern humans. Suddenly, the old stories didn't seem so impossible. Tales of strange peoples, of races that were not like us, no longer looked like pure invention. Human memory is long. Oral traditions can preserve core narratives for millennia. The Aboriginal Australians tell stories of giant creatures that we now know as extinct megafauna, and geological events from 10,000 years ago. So when the myths of the Indian subcontinent speak of giants, of a race of powerful, tall, fair-skinned beings who came from the north, perhaps we should listen more carefully. Perhaps the stories are not nonsense. Perhaps they are a distorted echo of a real biological event. Perhaps they are the first garbled, pre-scientific attempt to describe a moment of profound genetic collision, a moment when one lineage of men arrived in a new land and changed its genetic destiny forever. The question is, can DNA prove it? For decades, the accepted story of South Indian Brahmins was simple, almost elegant in its tidiness. It was the story told in textbooks, in introductory anthropology courses, in every standard history of the subcontinent. The Brahmins, the priestly caste at the apex of the traditional social hierarchy, were, in that narrative, the biological descendants of Aryan invaders, or migrants, who poured into the Indian subcontinent from the steppes of Central Asia sometime in the 2nd millennium BCE. These newcomers were the bringers of the Sanskrit language, the composers of the Vedas, the architects of the caste system itself. They arrived on horse-drawn chariots, conquered the indigenous populations, and imposed their language, religion, and social order upon the land. Over centuries, this conquering elite spread across the subcontinent, establishing themselves as the highest caste, and their descendants, the Brahmins of today, were the living proof of that ancient conquest. The genetic implication of this story was clear, and, to many, uncomfortable. It suggested a rigid biological continuity. It implied that a person of Brahmin descent in, say, a temple town on the Kaveri River in Tamil Nadu or in a village on the Godavari in Andhra Pradesh, was, in some fundamental way, more closely related to a person in Krakow or Samarkand than to the non-Brahmin farmer in the next district. This wasn't just an academic theory. It had profound social and political implications. It suggested a migration, perhaps an invasion, and a subsequent genetic apartheid that had persisted for 3,500 years. This was the story they told us. It was a story of clear arrival, of a foreign male elite. It was a story that deeply shaped modern Indian identity politics. But the problem is, the story, as it was told, was almost entirely wrong. It was far too simple. It missed the most profound part of the puzzle. The first crack in this monolithic narrative came not from a historian, but from a geneticist looking at a very specific part of the human genome. Because to understand what really happened, you have to understand that the story of our past is not written in one book. It's written in two. Every person alive carries at least two distinct, completely non-mixing genetic archives. The first is the mitochondrial DNA. You inherit this exclusively from your mother. It changes only through rare mutations. By tracking these mutations, geneticists can trace a pure maternal lineage back through time, generation by generation, mother to great-grandmother, all the way back to the dawn of humanity. The second archive is the Y chromosome. If you are biologically male, you inherit this exclusively from your father. It behaves in the same way. It traces a pure paternal lineage, father to great-grandfather, back into the deep past. These two archives do not talk to each other. They tell independent stories of male and female ancestry. And this is where the mystery of the South Indian Brahmins truly begins. Because these two archives, housed within the very same individuals, tell a story of startling, profound contradiction. The anomaly first emerged in a landmark study published in 2001 in the journal Genome Research. The lead author was Michael Bamshad, and the study focused on caste populations in Andhra Pradesh. The team looked at both mitochondrial DNA and Y chromosome markers across a spectrum of caste groups, from the highest to the lowest. What they found was not the expected pattern of a simple, homogeneous migration. Instead, they found a profound asymmetry. And it was an asymmetry that has been replicated in study after study ever since, becoming one of the most robust findings in the entire field of South Asian genetics. Here is the anomaly in its starkest form. When you look at the maternal line, the mitochondrial DNA, of South Indian Brahmins, it looks, overwhelmingly, local. Deeply local. The vast majority of the mtDNA lineages belong to a broad family of haplogroups called macrohaplogroup M, and within that, to sublineages like M2, M3, and M6. These are not lineages from the steppes of Central Asia. They are not from West Eurasia. They are lineages that have been in the Indian subcontinent for an astonishingly long time. We are talking 40,000, 50,000, even 60,000 years. These are the genetic signatures of the first modern humans who ever set foot on the subcontinent, the descendants of the pioneering out-of-Africa coastal migration that peopled South and Southeast Asia. The women who carried these lineages were the daughters of the most ancient settlers of India. They were indigenous in the deepest possible sense of the word. So, the maternal story is one of profound, unbroken continuity. The mothers of the South Indian Brahmins were, by and large, not from the steppes. They were from right here. But now, flip to the other archive. Now, look at the Y chromosome. The story changes utterly. The paternal line of these very same South Indian Brahmin populations tells a completely different tale. When Bamshad and his team sequenced the Y chromosomes, they found a powerful, unmistakable signal of West Eurasian heritage. The dominant lineage was R1A1A, specifically a subclade known as R1AZ93. This is a lineage with deep roots, far to the northwest of the subcontinent, its origins tracing back to the Pontic-Caspian steppe thousands of years ago. In many South Indian Brahmin communities, this R1A lineage reaches frequencies of 30, 40, even 50% or more. Let that sink in. Half the men in some of these communities carry a Y chromosome that is not indigenous to the subcontinent. But here is the astonishing contrast. In the non-Brahmin populations living in the exact same geographic area, the farmers, the artisans, the lower castes, the tribal groups who have shared the same land, breathed the same air, and eaten the same food for millennia, that same R1A lineage is found at dramatically lower frequencies. Sometimes in the single digits, sometimes almost not at all. The 2001 Bamshad study directly correlated this. The higher the caste rank, the higher the frequency of this foreign Y chromosome. The lower the caste, the less of it there is. So, we have a paradox. The women were indigenous, the men were, to a large degree, not. The mothers were native South Asians. The fathers were West Eurasians. It's a genetic mystery written into the very bodies of millions of people. To understand how this could happen, we have to go on a deep dive into the genomic mechanisms, the lineages, and the population movements that created this paradox. We have to understand what these haplogroups are and how they moved across the Earth. Let's start with the mitochondrial DNA, the maternal line. The macrohaplogroup M is one of the oldest out-of-Africa lineages in existence. As early Homo sapiens left Africa and began their long trek eastward along the coast of the Arabian Peninsula and into India, mutation M arose. It was a new genetic marker and a population of pioneers. From India, this M lineage expanded and diversified. It gave rise to daughter lineages that spread across all of Asia, to the east into China and Japan, to the south into the Andaman Islands and Australia. But its deepest roots, its greatest diversity, are in the Indian subcontinent. This is where M has lived the longest. This is where it is most varied. The specific sublineages found in high frequency in South Indian Brahmins, M2, M3, M6, are not just any M lineages. They are lineages that have been evolving independently within India for tens of thousands of years. They are, in a very real sense, the living genetic heritage of the first Indians. Their presence in a population is a powerful marker of deep, autochthonous ancestry. Now, consider the Y chromosome. R1a is a different beast entirely. Its story begins not in India, but in the vast grasslands of the Pontic-Caspian steppe, north of the Black and Caspian Seas, thousands of years ago. This was the homeland of the people we now call the Yamnaya, a culture of pastoralists who domesticated the horse, developed the wheel, and built a way of life based around cattle and mobility. These were not a static, settled people. They were movers. Around 3000 BCE, perhaps earlier, they began to expand out of their steppe homeland. They moved west into Europe, they moved east into Siberia, and they moved south into Central Asia. As they moved, their Y chromosomes moved with them. The R1a lineage diversified. One particular branch, Z93, became dominant among the groups that moved towards the south and east, towards the Indus Valley and the borders of the Indian subcontinent. This is the branch, R1a Z93, that is found at such high frequency in modern Brahmin populations. It is the genetic smoking gun of a male-mediated migration from the north. But the key finding from the ancient DNA revolution, spearheaded by scientists like David Reich and Vagesh Narasimhan, is that the people who brought this R1a into India were not themselves pure steppe pastoralists. By the time they reached the borders of the subcontinent, they were already a genetically mixed group. The 2009 Nature paper, Reconstructing Indian Population History, led by Reich, analyzed 25 Indian groups, including South Indian Brahmins, using genome-wide SNP data. This was a quantum leap from looking at just the Y chromosome and mtDNA. It looked at the entire genome, and what it revealed was a set of large-scale patterns. It showed that the ancestry of modern Indians can be largely modeled as a mixture of two ancient hypothetical source populations. They called them Ancestral South Indians, or ASI, and Ancestral North Indians, or ANI. The ASI are the descendants of the first settlers, those ancient bearers of mtDNA haplogroup M. They are the deep-rooted indigenous population of the subcontinent. The ANI are more complex. The ANI themselves are an ancient admixture. When groups from the steppes moved south into Central Asia and the region around the Indus Valley, they encountered the populations of the Indus periphery, the sophisticated agrarian people of the Harappan civilization. The two groups mixed. The resulting population, rich in both steppe ancestry and Indus periphery ancestry, is the ANI. So the steppe ancestry was not a pure, direct injection. It was a complex, multi-stage process. Steppe pastoralists mixed with Indus Valley farmers. Then, later, those mixed groups moved further into the subcontinent, where they mixed with the descendants of the ASI. Now, let's bring this back to our South Indian Brahmins. When you analyze their entire genome, not just the Y chromosome or mtDNA, you find a mixture of these two source populations. ASI, and ANI. They have more ANI ancestry than their non-Brahmin neighbors. And that ANI ancestry, as we now know from the Narasimhan et al. 2019 paper in Science, includes a significant steppe component. Narasimhan's team analyzed ancient genomes from across Central and South Asia, and their work was definitive. It showed that the steppe ancestry component, which is closely linked to that R1a Y chromosome, reached South Asia in the Bronze Age. It's dated, broadly, to the period between roughly 2000 and 1500 BCE, though pinpointing the exact centuries of the initial pulses is an area of active research and refinement. This timeline aligns with a period of massive upheaval. The great cities of the Indus Valley civilization were in decline. The late Harappan period was a time of deurbanization, population movement, and social change. And it is precisely in this window that we see the arrival of the Indo-Aryan languages, the ancestor of Sanskrit, into the subcontinent. The genetic evidence and the linguistic evidence, once fiercely debated, now point in the same direction. The arrival of the steppe ancestry and the arrival of the Indo-Aryan languages are linked. But here is where the deep dive takes us into the mechanics of the mystery. The manner of that admixture was not a random, even mixing of populations. It was sex-biased. This is the crucial concept. Admixture between two groups rarely happens by merging two equal wholes. Often, it is driven by movement of one sex from one group into the other. In the case of the early Vedic period in India, the data is astonishingly clear. The admixture process was heavily male-biased. This means that the gene flow was not a wave of migrating families, men, women, and children moving south together. Instead, it was a flow of primarily men. West Eurasian men were entering the subcontinent, establishing themselves in positions of power and influence, and having children with indigenous South Asian women. The mechanics are not fully understood and remain a subject of intense debate. Was it conquest? A male warrior elite arriving to subjugate a local population? Was it a more gradual migration of male traders, priests, and pastoralists who formed alliances with local populations, offering new religious ideas and social structures in exchange for wives and resources? Was it a founder effect, where a small number of arriving males, due to social dominance, had a disproportionate reproductive success over many generations, their sons and grandsons continuing the pattern? The genetic data cannot by itself tell us the social mechanisms with certainty. What it can tell us is the result, and the result is this. Over generations, the Y chromosomes of the newcomers, particularly R1a Z93, became fixed in the upper echelons of this new society, precisely because status and marriageability were passed down through the male line. Meanwhile, the mitochondrial DNA of the local women, those ancient M lineages, was passed down through the female line, generation after generation, preserving the deep indigenous history of the land. The male line was new. The female line was ancient. The society was new. The land was old. The two stories, coexisting in the same bodies, are the genetic signature of this entire era. Further support comes from the 2019 Narasimhan study. It explicitly shows a north-to-south gradient in this steppe ancestry. It is highest in groups in the northwest of the subcontinent, and it decreases as you move south and east. But here's the fascinating wrinkle. The study confirmed that this steppe ancestry is consistently elevated in Brahmin groups, even in the deep south, compared to their non-Brahmin neighbors in the same geographic location. A South Indian Brahmin living in Tamil Nadu will have, on average, more of this ancient steppe ancestry than a non-Brahmin farmer in the same village. The gradient is not just geographic, it is social. The signal of this ancient migration did not just diffuse across space. It was amplified by the social structure of the caste system itself. The very system that the arriving groups helped to create became the vehicle that preserved their genetic legacy, even as it spread thousands of kilometers from its point of origin. The caste system functioned, in a genetic sense, as a set of semi-permeable barriers. It limited gene flow between groups, and by placing those with the highest ANI and steppe ancestry at the top, it ensured that this foreign ancestry would be concentrated and preserved at the apex of the social pyramid for more than 3,000 years. This is the deep mechanism. It is not just a story of migration. It is a story of how social power, operating over millennia, can sculpt the genetic landscape of an entire subcontinent. But what does this mean for the living? For the millions of people today who carry these lineages, often without knowing it. This is where the story moves from ancient DNA to human connection. This is where it touches identity. Imagine a young man in Bangalore, or Chennai, or a small town in Andhra Pradesh. He is a Brahmin. Perhaps his family has been in the same town for generations. They speak Telugu, or Tamil, or Kannada. They are, in every cultural way, deeply South Indian. His grandmother's cooking, the local temple festivals, the rhythm of the agricultural year, these are his world. His identity is Southern, through and through. Now, if this man were to take a direct-to-consumer DNA test, what would he find? The results might be confusing. The ancestry composition charts might show a confusing mix of South Asian and perhaps a trace of Central Asian or European, but the deeper truth would be in the haplogroups. His mitochondrial haplogroup might come back as M3. His report would tell him this is a lineage with deep roots in South Asia, one of the oldest human lineages in the region, tracing back to the first people who settled the subcontinent. A lineage of the land, a lineage of the first mothers. But then, his Y chromosome haplogroup might come back as R1AZ93. And the report would tell him a different story. It would trace his father's line not to the plains of the Kaveri or the Godavari, but to the wind-swept steppes of Eurasia. It would tell him his paternal ancestors were among the Bronze Age peoples who migrated south into the subcontinent thousands of years ago. This duality is not an abstraction. It is written in his cells. It is a paradox he carries with him every day. He is, simultaneously, the descendant of the earliest people of India and the descendant of later migrants. He is indigenous, and he is not. He is the product of a specific, ancient social process that privileged his paternal line, and this can evoke a range of emotions. For some, it is a source of curiosity, a fascinating keyhole through which to view the deep history of their family. For others, it might be uncomfortable. It might challenge their sense of pure, unbroken indigeneity. It might seem to validate or complicate modern political narratives about who is a true Indian. Did his ancestors invade? Did they migrate? Did they marry in? What is the moral weight of a genetic pattern created by a system of social hierarchy? These are not just scientific questions, they are profoundly personal and political ones. The DNA forces a confrontation with a complex past. It reminds us that identity is not a single, pure thread, but a tapestry. And this particular tapestry is woven from threads of migration, power, and endurance. It is a reminder that no people are an island. For the viewer watching this, the connection might be even more direct. If you are a South Indian Brahmin, or if you have South Indian Brahmin ancestry, this story is literally your family history. The asymmetry of the maternal and paternal lines is not something that happened to other people. It is something that happened to your direct ancestors. Your great times 50 grandmother was likely a woman whose lineage had been in the subcontinent for tens of thousands of years. And your great times 50 grandfather was likely a man whose lineage arrived from the steppes or Central Asia in the Bronze Age. They met, they had children, and that pattern repeated and repeated and repeated until it produced you. The mystery is your origin story. Yet, even with all the stunning clarity of modern genomics, even with the ancient DNA from the steppes and the careful modeling of ancestral populations, there are still profound questions that science cannot yet answer. The biggest one is the question of how, and perhaps why, the social mechanism unfolded. The genetics tell us a wave of males arrived and their genes became dominant at the top of society. But the genetics are silent on the nature of that process. Was it a violent invasion? A slow, centuries-long migration of priests and warriors who were welcomed for their knowledge and skills? Was it a caste of powerful men who were given local wives as part of political alliances? The Rig Veda, composed during this very period of admixture around 1500 BCE, refers to battles, to forts being destroyed, to a people called the Dasas, who are described as dark-skinned and defeated. Does this textual evidence corroborate a scenario of conquest? Or is it a later, retrospective mythologizing of a process that was far more gradual and complex? The epic wars of the Mahabharata, which later generations dated with astonishing precision to a specific astronomical moment in 3102 BCE, may be a cultural memory of this entire era of social upheaval and the fusion of different peoples. The giant Bhima, a son of a god, a man of immense strength from the north, might be a literary echo of these very migrants, blown up to mythic proportions. The link between the myths of giants and the real biological story is tantalizing. We can now see that a real demographic event, The male-mediated influx of people who were physically and genetically distinct occurred. Could the ancient stories of demigods and giants be the way a pre-literate society recorded and made sense of this event for posterity? It is speculation, but it is speculation grounded in a new, data-driven reality. And there are other unresolved questions. The genetic models are still coarse. They rely on the concept of these two ancestral populations, ANI and ASI, which were themselves mixtures. The precise composition of the ASI remains a mystery. We have no ancient DNA from the deep south of India dating back to the first settlement. We are inferring their genetics from modern populations. A single, well-preserved ancient genome from a 40,000-year-old site in Tamil Nadu could rewrite the entire model. Furthermore, the exact contribution of the Indus Valley civilization to the ANI is still being calibrated. We have ancient DNA from Indus periphery sites in modern-day Iran and Turkmenistan, but not from the major urban centers of Mohenjo-Daro or Harappa themselves. The people of the Indus Valley remain, in many ways, genetically hidden from us, their story only partially told through the proxy of their neighbors. The question of why this admixture was so profoundly sex-biased, why so few women from the incoming groups contributed to the gene pool, also remains open. It is one of the great puzzles in the entire field. Was it a practice of exogamy, where men from one group married women from another? Was it a deliberate strategy of elite male settlers taking local wives to cement their power? Or was the migration simply overwhelmingly male from the start? A movement of traders, mercenaries, and priests, with women staying behind. The social history that would answer these questions is lost to time, likely forever. And there is the haunting question that science cannot touch. What does this mean for the idea of origin? If a South Indian Brahmin is as indigenous on his mother's side as a member of a tribal group, but not on his father's, which lineage defines him? The science can describe the asymmetry. It cannot tell us how to weigh it. It cannot tell us what identity means. It can only lay the data before us and let us wrestle with it. The story of the South Indian Brahmins is a story of an unexpected connection. It connects the lush river valleys of the south to the distant, frozen steppes of Eurasia. It connects the earliest pioneers of human migration to the Bronze Age horse riders. It connects the language you speak to the genes you carry in a way that is both clear and deeply complex. It is a story of a female line that endured for 1,000 generations, silent and unbroken, carrying the memory of the first people. And it is a story of a male line that arrived like a shockwave, riding out of the north with new technologies, new gods, and new ideas about how society should be ordered. The two lines met. They did not merge completely. They intertwined, creating a double-stranded narrative of ancestry that is written inside the body of every South Indian Brahmin alive today. The genetic mystery is not that one story is true and the other is false. The mystery is that both stories are true at the same time. The scientific journey to this conclusion has been long and contentious, but the evidence is now formidable. The ancient DNA is in the ground. The lineage markers are in the people. The social structure that preserved the pattern is in the history books. The fossil of a giant, the myth of a demigod, the epic of a great war. These may be the last, distorted echoes of a migration so transformative that it reorganized the very genetic fabric of a subcontinent. And if you carry that R1AZ93 on your Y chromosome and that M3 in your mitochondria, then you are the living, breathing resolution of that paradox. You are the point where the old story and the new story meet. Now, the mystery doesn't end here. It begins with you. If this paradox of ancestry, where your mother's line tells one story and your father's line another, has gripped your imagination, imagine what is still buried in the unread chapters of your own genetic code. Hit that like button to signal the algorithm that you are ready to uncover more hidden histories that science was too afraid to tell, and subscribe with notifications on so you don't miss the next revelation about our species that will be pulled from the bones of giants and the bloodlines of the living. Thank you for watching. See you in the next one. Thanks for staying until the very end. Goodbye for now.